Communism, as I understand it, is that the state owns all property. Capitalism, as I understand it, is that capital wins, which is why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. What we need is a system of property rights. What we need is a system of justice. And to get a system of property rights, which is the same as a system of justice, we really only need one law, and that's no trespassing. So right now, our legislature does nothing but engage in trespassing. They use other people's power and claim the right to use it. That's trespassing. In a kingdom, the king doesn't use other people's power. He uses his own power, so he's not trespassing. So now you can see in a kingdom that you can start to get justice, because instead of having trespassers as leaders, we have owners of the kingdom who just own the kingdom. And now, when they own the kingdom, they make decisions as to what they do with the kingdom. They don't make decisions as to what you do with your property, like what we generally have now. And in this system of justice, what you start to get is accountability. You see, right now, we have this concept of immunity, which public officials sometimes get to receive. And this creates an element of tyranny, because if you're a victim of one of these acts where there's immunity, you have no recourse. That's clearly not law. That's a problem. So in a kingdom, you have the king who owns the kingdom. So if one of his men or officials does something which trespasses on another person's rights, then the king takes accountability for that. Because that's what the king does, is he ensures a law of no trespassing. And of course the king will occasionally trespass in life. It'll happen. But the king can own up and take accountability when he gets sued for his acts of trespassing. So there's no immunity. But what the king can do is say, look, the public official was acting on my behalf. Therefore, the public official is immune because I'm taking accountability for the acts that they did. So if they committed a bad act, it's on the king. Because, again, that public official represents the king. But there is one really important area where the king says he will not protect and give any immunity to his officials. And that's in the area of corruption. If they engage in an act of corruption, they're on their own. So this would mean that public officials would be very reluctant to engage in corrupt acts because they're not going to have any immunity whatsoever. There's no case dismissed or anything like that. They're going to go to a trial and the jury will decide whether or not they committed a corrupt act. Now, what is a corrupt act? I mean, we barely talk about it in our system because we have a constitution. And the constitution is what people look at rather than looking at the anti-corruption laws. So therefore, we have completely missed the entire boat in our legal system. So the anti-corruption laws say that, look, when a public official is taking or withholding an official act, that is an act of His Majesty the King. His Majesty the King, again, will take responsibility when that act is done solely for his benefit. But if that act is done for benefit that is not solely for the king, includes other people receiving a benefit, that is a corrupt act. And therefore the king will not take account responsibility. He will not give any immunity to his official who did so. And once you have a situation where the king will not provide immunity for corruption, you will see the public officials will engage in all sorts of activity to ensure that they're not corrupt. Like, for example, you will see the judges will insist that they wear wigs so that they cannot be identified. Because if they can't be identified, it's much harder to accuse them of corruption. You don't even know their names. You will see that public officials will do things to question their bosses and say, I'm not doing that. That's going to lead me to a prison sentence. That's going to lead me to liability. And now you start to get a system of justice where people will stand up to their superiors and say no, rather than now where they just follow orders. Because in a kingdom, if you trespass, the king's going to hold you liable or accountable. He's not going to care whether or not you were following orders. And could you imagine a world where everyone was accountable for their actions? Long live the king.